Welcome everyone to the first of our series of webinars from the Horticulture Professional Development Programme. Today we're fortunate to have Ian Cox from Eco Studio delivering our first webinar on doing more with less. This wasn't how we'd intended to deliver the programme. It was going to be a face-to-face program. We had the first webinar planned. Some of you were joining us on that. So this is an alternative idea of moving to the webinars for now, and we'll see where we go. So just before I hand over to Ian to go through the housekeeping, you can see it all on the screen, but you're muted with your camera off. You can put Q&As, you can put questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom. And there's also a chat box, but we'll run through the complete webinar before Ian answers the Q&As. That's great. I'll hand over and enjoy. Thank you.
Hi there, thanks for joining me today. This short webinar is about doing more with less, and over the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to talk to you about how to identify where you can make cost savings in your business process, as well as some practical ways to manage your resources more efficiently, and by doing so, how this can help improve your business's environmental performance. This is one in a series of webinars that aim to provide a taster for Tyfu Cymru's new training programme for horticulture professionals, and I'll explain more about that later. The webinar has been pre-recorded, as you can probably tell, and I am here to answer any questions you may have at the end of the session, assuming you've attended a scheduled webinar session. Okay, a little bit about me. My experience, I'm Ian Cox, and my experience is in helping organisations to put sustainability into practice. I set up my company, Eco Studio, in 2008, and over the years I've designed programmes and delivered projects that, for businesses, help really create responsible brands, products, packaging and services that are low in environmental impact and high in social value. And I'll hopefully be able to share some of my experiences through this short webinar. Now, the recent pandemic has been a testing time for all of us, and whilst many fruit and vegetable growers have experienced a sharp rise in demand for their produce, for others, particularly ornamental growers, it's sadly been the opposite case. And whilst we can't predict the future, what we can do is prepare for the challenges ahead. And one way to do this is by building the resilience of your business through being more efficient with the resources that you use and by reducing your costs. And also understanding by how doing more with less, it can improve your business environmental performance. For example, using less fuel will reduce carbon. Using less fertiliser can reduce other greenhouse gas emissions such as nitrous oxide and methane. And really that's sort of what the aim of the webinar, of today's webinar, is to build horticulture businesses' resilience to current and future challenges. And some objectives I've laid out on the slide there are to help you identify where you can make cost savings in your process, to share some practical tips and ways to manage your resources more efficiently, and how by doing that can help you improve your business's environmental performance. And that last point is really where we're seeing a surge in demand, with government, trade buyers and consumers driving the agenda for sustainable produce. Businesses, horticulture businesses that can demonstrate good practices are really well positioned to take advantage of this growing demand. And I've thrown some, put some points and quotes on the slide there. You may be aware, I don't know, but in Wales there's legislation in place and through the Environmental Act, and one of the goals that has been set by Welsh Government and indeed internationally is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Wales by at least 80% by 2050. So it's quite a big challenge, but nevertheless, businesses that are actively looking at ways to innovate to reduce their carbon and take on low carbon technologies and so on are going to be much more likely to get support from the government in the future if they're able to demonstrate that. But equally, and perhaps more fundamentally, there's an increasing consumer demand for sustainable produce, and ethical spending grew in the UK to over 40 billion in 2019. That's a four-fold increase over the last 20 years. So it's a significant and growing market. And the last point on that slide, if you're a business selling into supply chains, whether you sell to wholesalers or retailers or even really to the public sector, these larger buyers tend to have social responsibility obligations in place. Some of them are legally binding, some of them are market driven, but nevertheless they will actively seek out and increasingly seek out suppliers that can help them meet these objectives. So again, if you're a business that's trying to sell into these types of supply chains, then it makes sense to be thinking about your own environmental performance. A question is, how do you and where do you start to look at reducing your resources, saving costs and improving your environmental performance? And the first thing I say is it's important to focus on the things you can control and not those that you can't. And the types of resources that most growers are likely to need are things like soil, water, energy, fuel, and so on. Also, of course, labour, which that's going to be covered separately by Tyfu Cymru. But I recommend breaking down your process into stages and then begin to think about what resources and how much of each you use at each stage. And we can then start to identify and prioritise where savings can be made. Now, this is called life cycle thinking, and I find using the model on the screen is a helpful way to do this, to help you break down your process into different stages. Now, of course, not every horticulture business will do things in this exact order. And of course, this model can be rearranged or adapted to suit your specific needs. But, for example, at the grow stage, do you know how much water, energy and fuel you use and when you use it? What other resources do you use? Manure, fertilizers and chemicals, for example. Do you monitor the amount you use, and can you take action to use less? If you have greenhouses or polytunnels, perhaps that need to be heated, are they adequately sealed to prevent heat loss and energy loss? At the pack stage, is the packaging you use single use? Is it left with your customers to dispose of at a cost to you and likely a burden to them? Or can you offer a reusable packaging system that you can collect, or that perhaps they can return after use? Packaging that can be used time and again prevents waste and can be much more cost effective when compared to single use. That's regardless of the material used. And there's been obviously a strong recent focus on plastic, which has kind of resulted in a lot of alternative packaging materials being used that are often tend to be more expensive and not always better for the environment, particularly if they're still single use, because those resources are still being used once and then wasted in effect. And I will cover packaging in much more detail in a separate webinar, and indeed as part of the professional development training program that I'll explain at the end of this webinar. At the next stage on the model, the store stage, does your produce require temperature controlled storage, or indeed does the humidity where it's stored need to be controlled? If so, do you regularly perform checks to ensure this is accurate? Heating and cooling at the wrong temperature, for example, can run into hundreds of pounds of wasted energy if it's not controlled effectively. Likewise with humidity, and as well as resulting in damaged produce if you get it wrong. And the final stage on the model there, at the deliver stage, how effectively can you plan your deliveries? Clearly, a fully loaded van is a lot more fuel efficient than a half full one. So maybe what some companies do is shared deliveries with others to make sure that fully loaded vans are happening as often as possible. Is backhauling viable? If you're a business that operates a veg box delivery scheme whereby you drop these boxes off at each customer's doorsteps, that whilst that can be a really useful service, particularly at the moment, it can add a considerable amount to your fuel bill. So maybe if you could arrange drop-offs at a central point for customers to collect, that might be a good way then of reducing fuel and reducing costs, and again improving your environmental performance. And by thinking about your processing stages like this, the idea is then you can start to chart the resources you use at each stage, and then begin to set priorities for where you can make the biggest cost savings. And here's a quick example to illustrate how this might start to look. What I've done on this chart is listed just one resource that might be used at each stage, and then a few practical actions against each. So, for example, at the growing stage, a resource that would be used will be water, and a couple of actions might be to monitor water use and plan irrigation, and another action might be to collect and reuse rainwater. What I've then done is estimated the investment in terms of time and money that each action might require, and the potential cost saving. Again, taking the water, the first action, monitor water use and plan irrigation, should be fairly low in terms of investment in terms of time and money, whereas the cost saving could be a medium, because you'd be reducing the amount, potentially you'd be reducing the amount of water that you use. Where the next action, collect and reuse rainwater, the investment might be, in terms of time and money, might be medium, because you're invested in a system and you're implementing potentially a new system, but the saving might be high, because of course you're reusing rainwater and not getting it from the mains, and therefore saving money that way. And the idea is, of course, to set priorities based on easy wins. And on this screen, I've then begun to highlight those actions that are low on investment and would deliver medium to high potential cost savings. So it's just a good way of laying out the types of resources that you use, some practical actions you can take to improve your efficiency and use less of those resources in effect, and then a way of sort of prioritizing the easy wins. So to summarize, the recent pandemic has put into sharp focus some of the challenges that we might be faced with as we move forward. And one way to prepare for these challenges is to build the resilience of your business through being more efficient with the resources that you use, and by reducing your costs, and how by doing so it can improve your business's environmental performance, and then better position yourself to take advantage of the growing marketplace for sustainable produce. To do this, it's important to focus on the things you can control and not those that you can't. And to begin, I recommend by breaking down your process into the different life cycle stages, and then starting to think about what resources and how much of each you use at each stage, and then starting to identify and prioritising where savings can be made. And hopefully the life cycle model that I've talked you through in this webinar will be a good practical tool that you can use to help you move forward. Okay, before I finish, I mentioned at the start of this webinar that this is one of a series of webinars that we're running which provide a taster for Tyfu Cymru's new training programme for horticulture professionals. It's called the Horticulture Professional Development Programme, and exclusively for Welsh horticulture businesses, and aims to equip participants with a range of commercial skills through a tailored programme of masterclasses and leadership coaching delivered by Tyfu Cymru and their network of specialist mentors and business leaders. The programme offers flexibility to fit around the busy schedules of owners, senior managers and aspiring managers from ambitious horticulture businesses, and it can be completed in 1 year. And participating businesses must attend a minimum of 5 full or half-day masterclasses, plus there's a little bit of follow-up work that will be supported by a mentor that will ask each participant to do. Now, the masterclasses in the series are listed on the screen there in the blue boxes: leadership, strategy and visioning, business development and funding, strategic marketing, employing, retaining and managing people, managing change and innovation, supply chain management, packaging and process efficiency, digital, web and social media, and succession planning. And to check eligibility, businesses are invited to complete a simple 2-minute online application that can be found by following the link that's on the screen there. Okay, thanks for listening, and I hope this has been a helpful introduction to how you can build your business resilience by doing more with less. If you have any questions, then I'm more than happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. That's great. Any questions, anybody? I've got a good number of attendees, so let's see what comes through. There have been. I had connection problems this morning as well, Justine. It's frustrating, isn't it? The webinar is recorded, so what you've just seen and any questions we answer will be on the Knowledge Hub on the website as soon as we can get it up there. We'll just give okay, Ian, one of the questions that came through in advance was, we're seeing increased demand from customers for produce and packaging that's eco-friendly. This was from somebody who couldn't make it today. What steps can we take to take advantage of this?
Okay, well, I think first thing to say is that I think many businesses, particularly in the horticulture sector, are quite well positioned by nature of what they do to kind of take advantage of this marketplace. And I mean, a lot of businesses that we work with are kind of doing kind of good things already. You know, whether that's through being more efficient with resources, through providing sort of locally produced stuff, through offering provenance, through, like I say, better packaging and so on. And I think that you know, on one hand, it's about putting these things into practice, but I guess where a lot of businesses that I work with do tend to sort of miss a trick is really about how they then go on to communicate this sort of stuff. And you know, what we always say is, you know, if they're doing good things, then, you know, for crying out loud, make sure that you can communicate this to your customers. So it's normally a case of going through a similar process to what I've just described, understanding where you can make these sort of improvements, looking at kind of the fact that this is a growing marketplace for sustainability, and making sure you can align yourself with that offer. But I mean, simple things that can be done would be, you know, to create a web page on a website, write down the actions you're taking and why you're taking those and what the benefits are. And maybe you could link that through to your point of sale stuff, unpack, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of on one hand about doing good stuff, on the other hand, it's about communicating it effectively.
Thank you. Justine's asking, if I'm growing in pots outside, what's the most efficient way of watering?
That's quite a technical question.
Good luck.
I guess it's horses for courses, really, isn't it? I mean, I think you know, I mean, you guys in your industry will know much more about when to water and how much to water, and what the what the benefits of doing so are for the particular produce that you're growing. But I mean, in effect, you know, it would be about understanding, you know, how much water. I mean, as a commercial business, you'll be on a water meter, right? So if you're getting that from, you know, from the mains, then there's going to be a cost associated with that. So it's about understanding how much water you're using first and foremost, and if it's costing you a lot of money, then you'd probably want to take action about working out ways to be more efficient with that water use. So it could be a case of, you know, obviously things like planning your irrigation effectively, which is kind of outside the scope of this webinar, but you know, collecting rainwater, reusing rainwater to water plants would be a really good way and really good effective way of, you know, staying on top of the amount of water you use and reducing the amount of water you use, and therefore reducing your costs. I don't know if that answers your question at all, Justine.
Yeah, and I think we could add to that, Justine. We could pick up with you later. We have got an irrigation specialist available as well. So I think on top of that, we could add to that for you. Another one, Ian, our biggest running cost is diesel. We use to get produce to customers. How can we make improvements there?
Okay, well, I think if you've identified that you're using a lot of diesel when you're doing your delivery runs, I presume by getting your produce to customers, then that's the first step of obviously understanding kind of where those resources are being used. And I think then it's about working out what practical steps you can take to, you know, to reduce the amount of diesel you use. Now, things you could look at, obviously depending on your business model and depending on how you do what you do, but is there a way maybe of having perhaps more centralized drop-off points, particularly if you're into, there's a big boom at the moment, of course, with regards to sort of, you know, food box deliveries, fruit and veg deliveries and so on. If you're going directly to customers' doorsteps, then that's going to be much more expensive than if you drop these things off more centrally and got the customers effectively to come to you. So it might be a case of perhaps looking at the model that you're working to and kind of how you can make savings there. Maybe then considering things like shared distribution runs, shared delivery runs. If there are other businesses going in the same direction as you are, then can you collaborate that way? Can you share those distribution runs? Is couriering an option? You know, getting a courier in sometimes can be quite expensive, depending on your relationship with the courier. And then obviously kind of bigger picture stuff then would be to sort of convert from, you know, diesel powered delivery vehicles to electric vehicles. And there is a kind of, you may be aware, there is a ban on new diesel and petrol engines coming in 2035, which isn't that too far into the distance. So it may be good to be starting to think about switching over to electric vehicles anyway when the technology and the costs permit.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't think we've got any more coming through. Just one other thing, Ian, with so many challenges the businesses are facing at the moment, would you have 3 top practical steps they could take to save money?
I guess I would refer back to the model, the life cycle thinking model that I flagged up on the slides there, and think about each one of those stages in your process. Like I say, there might not be an identical process for every business, but at the same time, that model could be adapted to fit. But basically, it's about identifying. I would say practical things would be to try identify where in your process the biggest costs arise. So, like the previous question was, that might be through diesel being used in delivery, or it might be from water use and so on. So where do those costs arise is the first thing to identify. Then think about what actions you can take to be more efficient and reduce those costs. And then the third thing to do would be to prioritize those actions to take, which are going to create the easy wins and are going to achieve the largest cost savings. Those three things will be quite practical to do and shouldn't take up too much time. And I think that the payoff will be in the cost savings and obviously the environmental benefits as well that you can get out of that.
Thank you. Question from Nick. We've built up a developed box scheme delivery service so it's going back to your earlier point, Ian, over the last few years in South Pembrokeshire. I'm scared that if I go to a hub model that we will lose customers as they've got so used to us delivering to their doors. With the geography of South Pems and other rural areas, it's starting to prove very costly and time consuming.
So is the question is what can be done about that? I mean, I guess, Nick, it's I guess with that one, it's obviously about your relationship with your customers and how willing they would be to, you know, move towards this hub model, as you say. I think that where I would be looking to go on that would be to sort of try and explain to your customers about the challenges that you're facing with regards to the cost of, you know, delivering door to door, and basically that will ultimately have a knock-on effect in terms of how much it costs your customers to buy the produce off you. So it's kind of almost like you kind of, if you can offer them a service where it's convenient to them, all right, they've got to travel to get to you, but it'll be a place that's convenient to them. It'll save a lot of money for you as a business. Explain, you know, put that point across. You know, I would certainly sort of then focus on perhaps the environmental benefits of doing that as well. But I think, yeah, that cost and environmental advantage should be quite a persuasive argument.
Thank you. And we'll just give you another couple. Oh, hang on. Oh no, thank you. Thank you from Nick. That was a great question. Superb. Thank you. Great, thanks very much, Ian. That was a really good start and launch off to our horticultural professional development programme that I'm sure we would rather all be doing face-to-face, but we are where we are, and I think that's been a really good alternative. So we will put out details to you of the next one. Thanks all for joining, and thanks for your questions both in advance and today. When we finish the webinar, you will be asked to feedback. Please do take the time. It should be a quick feedback sheet, and that feedback's really useful to us to keep forming our next set of webinars. So thanks everybody. Have a good day. Looks like the sun's coming out now. Bye.